Melting ice has raised interest in shipping, mining, energy exploration and other enterprises in the Arctic, not only among countries that border it, but also in countries farther afield. The Arctic might be physically distant from Beijing, but China sees 66 degrees north as closer than ever before. As China releases its first ever Arctic paper, can it help dispel misconceptions on China's intentions? How do we assure the rest of the world that a Chinese presence in the Arctic is a win-win situation? Will the U.S. and Russia be further drawn into a new Cold War in the Arctic? To consider these questions and more today, I'm joined in the studio by Cui Hongjian, who is a researcher with the China Institute of International Studies, and Victor Gaozhikai, a CGTN commentator. We shall also talk to Pavel Falkenhorst, defense analyst in Russia via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we start, let's look at this.
Details of China's first white paper document on Arctic policies were released this morning. Deputy Foreign Minister Kong Xuanyou defined the policy in 4 aspects: definition, determination, principles and proposition. It stresses that China should be firm in defining itself as an important stakeholder in the Arctic for its geographic adjacency to the area and its participation in regional and global affairs. The document also outlines China's determination in future policy making.
China is determined to better know the Arctic, protect the Arctic, utilize the Arctic, and participate in the governance of the Arctic.
Principles of China's Arctic policymaking are also an important topic of the document. Kong Xuanyou pointed out that China follows the principles of respect, cooperation, win-win and sustainability while participating in Arctic affairs. He said that China will respect the sovereignty, rights and jurisdiction of Arctic countries, respect the freedom of activities in the area by non-Arctic states, and respect the common interest of the international community. When cooperating with other stakeholders, China wishes to build multilateral, comprehensive, sophisticated relations and maintain a win-win situation among different countries and industries. Kong also stressed the importance of environmental protection, reasonable exploration, and responsible human activities. The last section of the document listed China's propositions in its future role in the Arctic affairs. They demonstrate the previously said determinations and principles in 5 aspects: to deepen China's knowledge and exploration of the region, to protect the Arctic atmosphere and address climate change actively, to use natural resources including fishery and tide energy, as well as develop tourism, to participate in the governance of the area and improve cooperation with other stakeholders. Lastly, to promote peace and stability for the Arctic.
Gentlemen, on Friday, China released its first white paper on its Arctic policy and reaffirmed its commitment to safeguarding non-militarization, freedom of navigation, research, and environmental protection in the Arctic. But what does this paper mean for the future of our cooperation in this international water?
Yes, I think that as we know, there is a very big concern from outside the world about Chinese, I don't like to use the word of a strategy. I think it's just a policy, because always there is a requirement from outside to China to have a more transparent policy towards Arctic cooperation. I think now it's a very big progress for Chinese government to have this very clear, description about the Chinese principles and the Chinese policy goals in Arctic region. Because as we know now, China is a permanent observer in the Arctic Council. So China, I think, undoubtedly will try to provide some more, cooperation, some more, contribution to help this. How about environmental cooperation, and also environmental protection and development, and also, of course, how about the governance in this region. So I think it's a very, very good news for this cooperation and exploration in future in this Arctic region.
But Victor, do you think the clumsy behavior and image of a giant panda in the Arctic is welcomed by players concerned in the game?
I think if the giant panda can make it to the Arctic Ocean, he or she will become an instant star throughout the world. Of course,
a secret superstar.
Even in summertime, it may be too cold for giant panda, and I'm afraid there are no bamboos for giant panda to feed upon. However, talking about China being in the Arctic, even though China is not a literal country as far as the Arctic Ocean is concerned, China definitely has a legitimate interest in pursuing legitimate interests in the Arctic Ocean. Not every inch of the Arctic Ocean has been claimed as territorial sea or exclusive economic zone by the one or several littoral states. And I think for a country like China, which has extensive business interests throughout the world, and especially when the shipping lane is being developed in the Arctic,
with the climate change in favor of all other shipping nations.
Absolutely. China definitely has a legitimate interest to be there. I went as further north as Kirkenes in Norway, and I've the great pleasure of visiting the Arctic Council in Tromsø, Norway, and I'm very happy to see the Chinese government is publishing this white paper about China and the Arctic Ocean.
I've never been to the region of Arctic, but I would love to be mixed up with Eskimos in this region to go fishing there, perhaps one day with Pavel Fagerhar, who is now standing by in Moscow. Hello, Pavel. Are you surprised that China has shown strong interest in scientific research in the Arctic? And what is the response from Moscow?
Well, China's interest in the Arctic was evident before. In Russia, as always, there are a bit mixed feelings. There are some concerns that the kind of giant panda thing coming in may be not to Russian detriment, possibly. But on the other side of it, of course, Russia needs Chinese. They need Chinese investment. Right now, there is already an Arctic project, the Yamal natural liquefied gas production and export, where China has a stake. And they have already begun exporting liquefied natural gas to Europe and North American region. And if the Arctic will actually really open in the future for real massive commercial sea lane traffic, that would be China. It would be Chinese goods traversing to the Atlantic, to Europe and North America. That would be Chinese ships. So China is essential for the Arctic to really begin to develop in the future.
Yes, of course, it's a blessing and big relief for the Chinese observers that Russians are coming to terms with the growing presence of the Chinese scientific survey there. Now, in 2017, last year, the Arctic region was added to the Belt and Road Initiative. What does that mean for China and for parties in this game?
Yes. I think that undoubtedly the Belt and Road Initiative will become a very important framework for further cooperation between China and the Arctic countries. As we know now, especially last year, President Xi and President Mr. Putin proposed a kind of ice circle road, which means that China and Russia should try to have some more cooperation along with the Arctic region, especially so-called Northeast Passage, which means that because as we know, because of melting ice, there will be a very big benefit for the trade. Once there is a Northeast Passage between China and Europe, between China and North America, which means that China will take maybe less 20 to 30% of the cost compared with current passage going to South China Sea or some in Indian Ocean like that. So of course, besides this cooperation between China and Russia in the name of ice circle road, there is other cooperation between China and Nordic countries. As we know, Nordic countries is also a very important part of the Arctic states. Last year, China and this Council of Ministers of Nordic countries signed a strategic statement, say that both sides will try to have some more cooperation for maritime issues, for environmental protection and energy, everything. So I think it gives more energy exactly from China-Russia cooperation and also China-Nordic cooperation to support this Belt and Road Initiative cooperation.
What does UNCLOS say to the participation of countries that don't border the region of Antarctic? After all, some countries may be cautious about the economic might of the second biggest economy like China. They want to make sure and clarify the intention of China. But UNCLOS seems to protect the interests of these major economies, right?
Well, first of all, I think we need to be very careful in reading the UNCLOS provisions as far as the Arctic Ocean is concerned. In Arctic, it has very special circumstances. The fragility of the environment is much more so than probably in any other bodies of water in the world. So whichever country which moves into the Arctic to do commerce or to do exploration, scientific research, etc., need to give top priority to protection of environment in the Arctic Ocean. And in many parts of the Arctic Ocean, any damage or degradation of the environment may be irreversible and may last much longer than in other parts of the oceans and seas in the world. Therefore, I think China need to abide by the UNCLOS provisions very strictly, and also need to respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the littoral states. However, in terms of, for example, passaging through the exclusive economic zone or international waters, for example, UNCLOS has very clear provision allowing and entitling countries like China to exercise its legitimate right in using waters like that. And also we need to be aware that there are still unresolved territorial disputes between and among quite a few littoral states of the Arctic, and how to navigate through such legal complexity and how to fully respect the legitimate sovereign right and territorial integrity right of the littoral states, but also how to very carefully and prudently exercise our own legitimate rights is a very big challenge going forward.
As an important part of Belt and Road Initiative, Pavel, China's investment in this region for either the infrastructure construction or the construction of a maritime Silk Road or Ice Silk Road, as the agreement between President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart Putin says clearly. Who will protect the freedom of navigation? Because China would have to study the risks and assess the vulnerabilities that may endanger China's business presence in the Arctic. At the same time, China has made it very clear that we oppose militarization of the Arctic. At the same time, world media say Russia have deployed their missiles and made a huge effort to protect its sovereign space and waters. How do you look at now the claims? What do you think of these claims?
Oh yes, Russia has in recent years invested enormous amounts of capital in developing and renewing military infrastructures in the Arctic, up to more than 40 bases, some of them former Soviet bases that are put back into action, and some are brand new ones. Even the Soviet Union didn't have such a presence in the Arctic as right now has Russia. And of course the Arctic is also important because it's the closest way over the pole for a possible military action with the United States. So it's a very important kind of military playground. And also there's of course the problem that you mentioned of sovereign rights and open seas rights. Russia actually considers that most of the Arctic is its territorial sort of waters, though it's not really territorial, it's exclusive economic zone, but Russia would want to treat them as territorial. The same actually Canada, which believes that it can fully regulate the Northwest Passage. So the Sea of Barents Sea is kind of open, but beginning from the Kara Sea to Chukotka, Russia would want to see that anyone who travels there or uses it for maritime traffic will ask Russian permission, will pay for Russian icebreakers bringing them through. So this could be some problems with the Americans that are always for freedom of the sea, absolutely. Maybe also some kind of scraps with China. But of course, that's a problem of the future, because up to now, if the western part of the Arctic Sea is open up to the Yenisei for constant traffic all year long, the western part of the Arctic still has a lot of ice. It didn't melt. And so their passage is questionable without an icebreaker, maybe a couple of 3 months a year. So it's not all time. And if you want to have it all time, you'll have to invest in new, very powerful icebreakers. And Russia's not sure, should it invest? Will there be enough traffic there?
Thank you so much, Pavel Falkenhorn. And you are also watching Dialogue with Cui Hongjian and Victor Gaojikai in the Beijing studio. We'll be back in a few minutes. Please stay with us. Welcome back. China has one station in the Arctic compared with the 5 in the Antarctic. Do you foresee us building more stations and icebreakers?
Yes, exactly. I think that because as we know, the scientific research will be a very, very, big priority for China to participate into this Arctic cooperation. Compared with China's presence in Arctic, I don't think now it's just for China we should stop something now. I think now we have 2 scientific research stations in Arctic region. One of them in Norway, another one in Finland. In Iceland, I'm sorry. But I think in future, undoubtedly, there will be more cooperation between China and the Arctic countries, and which means that there will be more, research station built by China. And also, of course, at the same time, I think maybe some more substantial cooperation will be more important than the number of the research station of China there. For example, now between China and the Nordic countries, between China and Russia, I think not only for commercial purpose, just like we mentioned, especially from Russian guests, that how about China-Russia cooperation to get a more convenient passage in the northeast part of the Arctic region. And also, as a more important thing for China and the Nordic countries and Russia, they can do some more joint research in the frame of Arctic cooperation, and also in the frame of Belt and Road Initiative. But of course, I think now the big issue now for the scientific research in Arctic is what will happen after the climate change. And also, even China is far away from Arctic region, but more than 1,000 kilometers between China and the Arctic. But undoubtedly, there will be some direct or indirectly, influence because of climate change in Arctic region. So I think that's the reason why China become the important stakeholder of the Arctic region. I think that the ecological, potential ecological change because of climate change will be a big concern from China's perspective, especially on scientific research.
Of course, some international documents that are legally binding allow China to conduct its explorations and scientific surveys in the Arctic. But taking Africa as an example, China and Chinese contractors have been environmentally heavy-handed during their exploratory endeavors. In Africa, China is frequently criticized for allowing its workers to mine or log without much care for the environment. This is one of the vulnerabilities for China to go abroad. What can you tell us about the policy efforts that the Chinese side may have rolled out?
I think China in particular, but also including all the other countries, need to be scrupulous in terms of observing the highest environmental standards. And we cannot afford to do this damage first and clean up second approach to development of any kind of projects, especially involving the Arctic Ocean. As I just now mentioned, damage to the environment in the Arctic Ocean may be much more serious and much more irreversible than in other parts of the world, given its special circumstances. And any kind of exploration of oil and gas or minerals, for example, including maritime navigation through the Arctic Ocean, need to really be held up to the highest standard. And China need to really put a great binding obligation on its corporates as well as its citizens operating in the Arctic Ocean. And I hope all the other countries will do the same thing.
Hongjian, China's research icebreaker, Xuelong, has made its maiden voyage through the Northwest Passage 1 year ago, and it is now the first Chinese polar research vessel to navigate all 3 major Arctic shipping routes. Why is this voyage of great importance, and how does its findings contribute to China's Arctic position? You are reluctant to use Arctic strategy. Let me use policy.
Yes, exactly. I think this voyage of the Xuelong not only very, important progress for Chinese scientific research in Arctic region, and also it become a very big news for this international scientific cycle. I think that this gives us some message that firstly China is capable of doing something, and especially China is developing its capability to be a more reliable partner with other stakeholders in Arctic region. Also, we know that because of China is not the Arctic state, so always there's a question from other stakeholders why China is there. Okay, so I think undoubtedly the big economy and more and more resources and capability will be very, not only good for China and also good for this future cooperation among all of the stakeholders. Another, I think, a big message from this voyage is always China try to, deliver the message to the international community that always China to be part of the Arctic cooperation in a peaceful way. There will not be any kind of militarization consideration from China. Also, I know that even for this, release of a white paper by Chinese government during the press, still there was some questions from foreign media about Chinese intentions there, say that okay, how about the Chinese military existence in that region in future, like that. So I think yes, still always there are some suspicions from outside. It's natural because China. Anyway, because even nearly 100 years, China signed a Spitsbergen Treaty. China became the stakeholder at that time of the Arctic cooperation. But undoubtedly, long time, not yet, we have an active policy towards the Arctic region. So I think China and the international community, both two sides, need to take some more time to be familiar with this Chinese participation and the Chinese contribution to the Arctic affairs.
Pavel, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State of the United States, said the Russians made Arctic a strategic priority, and China is also building ice-breaking tankers. The U.S. is a latecomer. The question is, Pavel, both the U.S. and Russia are marshalling much larger fleets of icebreakers to ply through the Arctic waters. Are you concerned a literal and figurative Cold War may be heating up at the top of the planet, and do you think China is likely to fall victim to such a geopolitical rivalry?
Well, the standoff is there. Of course, Russia has a great fleet of icebreakers. America has only one icebreaker, and the American Coastal Guard is actually promoting the Russian buildup because they want government funds to build at least a second or maybe third icebreaker. Russia is way ahead of everyone in icebreakers, and especially when Russia is building nuclear icebreakers, and there's plans to build even more powerful ones if there's really going to try and open up the eastern part of the Arctic Ocean for commercial traffic. And Russian military bases are there, and Russian naval ships are going right now far east through the Arctic to the Novosibirsk islands, where there's a new big base. So yes, it is right now a bone of contention. There's a kind of standoff. China is not seen, of course, right now by any of the participants as a direct party in this potential standoff in the Arctic. But all sides are looking to China, because if you want to capitalize on your military investment and have more money coming in, more commerce, if you want to open up the seas, if you want to export your natural resources, like from Yamal and from the Budinka, right now it all goes west. If you have a possibility to take it to the Pacific, there's more demand and the prices are higher. So China can help everyone to make the Arctic not only just a military standoff place, but an economic development zone.
The Arctic region is, of course, a very promising land for tourism and for the boom of maritime commerce. So how do you see the benefits of China's maritime and maritime commerce, as well as air flights?
Mm-hmm.
The commercial stakes, how big are they?
I think, yes, if we look at these potential benefits for China for commercial and economic or tourism, you can find, I think, firstly, there will be, just like I mentioned before, that the big drop of the cost of the trade between China and Europe, between China and North America. And secondly, as we know, there is a reach of resources and energy in that region. But of course, I think because of the environmental protection become a top priority for any stakeholder, including China, in Arctic region. So I think that we need to keep the balance that, just like Mr. Gao mentioned, we should try to have this environmental protection go first, and then on the basis of every kind of international law and environmental protection law, we can have our commercial activity there. But of course, I think finally China needs to get some more cooperation with other Arctic states. Once China want to have some more win-win cooperation. So I think that's the reason why China stressed the principle of win-win cooperation when it tried to have some more active role in Arctic region, because it's I don't think it's I think that it's just the current situation of the Arctic region, and of course China also try to play more constructive role, which means that just like our Russian guest mentioned, China will play a more important role as a big economic player. So I think it's different from previous situation in that region. For example, if we look at the gaming or the competition between Russia and the United States, and also that's the reason why the Nordic countries, I mean the European countries, they become the first group of the Arctic states to welcome China to be part of the Arctic cooperation.
With this discussion coming to an end, I'm afraid some of the observers of our dialogue may put on a bitter smile, as any benefits from the boom of maritime commerce in the Arctic would be the consequential meltdown of the beautiful freezing land. That's the result of climate change. With that, we delivered a very strong mixed message. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.